My name is Anna, I'm 27, and that evening I discovered my parents had signed my release papers against the doctor's orders, just to save money. If you've ever faced something like this, comment where you're reading from. The hospital ward had smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, and the memory of that mix clung to me even as I sat at home. On the nightstand, the crumpled discharge slip stared back, October 14th, stamped in black letters, released against medical advice. The doctor had been explicit, minimum 72 hours of observation. His words echoed in my head like a metronome. But my mother's voice had cut across them, sharp and efficient. Insurance doesn't cover everything. My father had signed, his pen scratching the paper as if he were authorizing a delivery, not gambling with my lungs. The rib binder dug into my chest as I inhaled. Every breath caught like glass shards in my ribs. I stared at my parents' handwriting on the forms, realizing they had measured my health against their balance sheet. 2 hours later, I was wedged into the back seat of the car, pressed against the window. The upholstery smelled of last winter's oranges and the bitter trace of cigarette smoke. I counted 22 streetlights between the hospital exit and our driveway. Each one felt like a warning flare. The house greeted me with silence. No stocked fridge. No phone numbers on the fridge door. Just the tick of the hallway clock and the sour aftertaste of betrayal pressing down harder than my bandages. I didn't know yet that in 5 days, a sealed envelope would arrive in the mail, and with it the proof that this wasn't just neglect, it was something calculated. The morning after my return, I woke to the smell of boiled cabbage drifting from the kitchen. It was 9:17 a.m. The old wall clock's hands clicked louder than usual, as though mocking me for oversleeping. I shuffled toward the doorway, careful of the stitches pulling under my ribs. My mother sat at the table, a neat stack of envelopes spread before her. She was slicing them open with the edge of a butter knife, lips pursed, eyes scanning numbers as if they were scripture. Among the pile, one sheet stood out, its header printed in bold, insurance claim. Before I could focus on the details, she slid it under another bill. "You're better off here," she said flatly, not looking up. "Hospitals exaggerate. 3 days, 5 days, they'll keep you as long as they can. Someone has to think about the cost." On the table, next to the bills, lay my debit card. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, but her hand moved quicker, covering it. "You don't need this right now. Rest," she added, as if confiscating candy from a child. The kettle whistled, steam fogging the narrow window pane. I wrapped my arms around myself, biting back the sting in my chest. For the first time, the thought slid through me sharp as a blade, I will not live by their math. Not anymore. I hadn't always noticed the arithmetic running beneath my parents' choices. But standing in that kitchen, staring at my card hidden beneath their palms, the pattern unfolded. When I was 12, I wanted to join the school choir. The uniform cost $40. My mother told me to sing at home instead. At 16, when my classmates were signing up for a summer language program, my father said, "That's a luxury," while sliding my savings into the envelope for utilities. By 19, I had learned the rule: what they couldn't measure in receipts, they dismissed as unnecessary. Still, there had been warmth threaded through the years. My grandmother's house smelled of rye bread and lavender soap. She'd slip me coins folded in tissue, whispering, "This is yours, don't tell." But after she passed, those tissue-wrapped coins were the only inheritance I ever saw. The will was managed by my parents, and every mention of it ended with, "It's complicated, you wouldn't understand." Now, the hospital bill was the latest entry in their ledger. My health, measured in deductible percentages. My pain, stacked against their grocery lists. What was at stake wasn't just money. It was the right to decide for myself, to draw a line that said my body was not negotiable. As I leaned against the counter, the fluorescent bulb above hummed. The smell of cabbage clung heavy in the air. I traced the chipped handle of a mug on the counter, its faded print reading "World's Best Dad." The irony stung sharper than the stitches. Somewhere in the pile of papers, under her palm or his pen, lay the proof of how far they'd already gone. I just didn't have it yet. 3 nights later, The house was dark except for the blue glow of the microwave clock, 11:42 p.m. I couldn't sleep. The stitches itched under the bandage, each breath reminding me I wasn't healed. I padded softly into the living room, the wooden floor cool under my bare feet. On the coffee table, a folder had been left open. Pages fanned out like a deck of cards, careless in their arrangement. I shouldn't have touched it, but my hand moved before my mind caught up. Inside was a bank statement. The numbers were neat, merciless rows. October 12, 11:03 a.m. Withdrawal, $4,800. October 13, 2:45 p.m. Withdrawal, $2,200. Both transactions from my own account. My chest tightened. I hadn't made them. My card had been under my mother's hand that morning. Tucked between the pages was a short note, my father's handwriting blunt. Move the rest before she checks. Insurance won't cover. Don't argue. The paper trembled in my hands. The words felt heavier than the stitches in my ribs. I pressed my palm to the rib binder, grounding myself in the fabric's rough edge. My account, 3 years of saving from part-time work, tutoring, and weekends spent folding clothes in retail, was gone. My body had been collateral, and now my independence was collateral too. I slid the folder shut, the cardboard scraping like sandpaper. My pulse pounded in my ears as I whispered to the empty room, I make a choice. The next morning, I took the bus downtown. Each bump in the road jarred my ribs, but I clutched the folder against me like armor. At 10:06 a.m. I stepped into a small office with frosted glass and the faint smell of toner. The sign on the desk read, Financial Services, Appointments Only. Behind the counter, a woman in her 50s adjusted her glasses and nodded toward the chairs. I handed her the bank statement. My voice was quiet but steady, these withdrawals weren't authorized by me. She scanned the pages, her brow tightening. Both came from in-person teller transactions, she said. Same branch. Signatures match the account file. She tapped the paper with her pen. Do you recognize this? I looked at the scrawl. It was my father's. Slanted, impatient, the same way he signed grocery receipts. I can file a dispute, she continued, but it needs to be done within 10 business days. Today is your deadline. Deadline. The word hit harder than the pen against the paper. File it, I said. My voice surprised me. Firm. Certain. She slid a form across the desk. My pen scratched the page, each stroke tearing slightly into the cheap paper. By the time I signed the last line, the clock on the wall ticked to 10:28. The woman glanced at me over the rims of her glasses. Be prepared. They may challenge this. It could take weeks. I folded the form into the envelope she provided, the paper warm from my grip. Weeks didn't matter. What mattered was this, for the first time, their arithmetic had a counterweight. As I left, the sun outside felt sharper, almost metallic against my face. My ribs ached with every step, but beneath the pain something else stirred, momentum. 2 days later, at 3:14 p.m, I sat in a narrow office that smelled faintly of leather chairs and old coffee. Across the desk, a lawyer in a navy suit flipped through the folder I had brought. The steady click of his pen was the only sound until he looked up. You have grounds, he said simply. Unauthorized withdrawals, plus the medical release against advice. We can file for an injunction to freeze the remaining funds until this is resolved. The word freeze settled over me like ice water, and relief. We drafted the letter together. 3 pages, dense with dates and amounts. October 12, $4,800. October 13, $2,200. Attached bank statement. Attached discharge slip. At the bottom, his signature in blue ink, mine beside it, trembling but present. At 4:37 p.m. The document was scanned and filed electronically. A case number appeared on the screen, #2045-7831. The lawyer leaned back. They'll be notified within 48 hours. Their access to your accounts will be restricted immediately. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of weak tea. My parents returned from the store, plastic bags rustling. My mother reached for the mail on the counter, flipping through envelopes. Then she froze. The injunction letter lay on top, sealed with the law firm's insignia. Her face drained of color. My father's jaw tightened as he tore it open. His eyes skimmed the lines, and for the first time in years, he had no words. I sipped my tea, the rim of the chipped cup pressing cool against my lip. The silence was thicker than any argument. The lever had been pulled. The fallout began within hours. By the next morning, 9:02 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification, withdrawal declined. The account was frozen. Their access was gone. At breakfast, the kitchen smelled of burnt toast. My father pushed his plate away untouched. My mother leafed through the mail, her fingers trembling, papers rattling like dry leaves. She didn't meet my eyes. The silence was heavier than shouting. Finally, she muttered, "Do you realize what you've done? This will ruin us." I set my cup down carefully, the ceramic clink echoing in the quiet. "No. It will save me." They had no answer. That afternoon, I met with the bank again. The clerk confirmed the freeze. "Funds will remain inaccessible until the case is resolved," she explained, stamping the file with today's date, October 21st. Her words carried the weight of a lock turning in a vault. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without flinching. At home, the balance of power shifted in small, almost invisible ways. My debit card stayed on my nightstand. The folder of bills no longer appeared on the kitchen table. When the phone rang, my parents stepped into the hallway, voices lowered. That night, I called a friend from college, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "Can I stay with you a while?" I asked. My ribs still hurt when I laughed at her quick, unhesitating answer, "Of course. Come." I packed slowly, folding clothes into a single suitcase. On top, I placed the envelope with the injunction letter. Proof that for once, the numbers were on my side. The house ticked with the sound of the old wall clock, steady and impartial. But beneath it ran a new rhythm, one that belonged to me. 2 evenings later, I was at my friend's apartment, a cramped one-bedroom on the 4th floor that smelled faintly of fresh paint and laundry detergent. My suitcase sat open on the floor, half unpacked. At 7:46 p.m., my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Account audit findings." My pulse quickened as I opened it. The attached PDF listed every withdrawal over the last 6 months. Alongside the amounts were scanned copies of the signed slips. Most were unmistakably in my father's hand. Some even had notes in the margins: utilities, insurance gap, medical. But one entry stood out. September 29, $1,300. The memo line, "Conference trip." That had nothing to do with me. It wasn't just hospital bills. My savings had been feeding their lifestyle. I printed the file at a corner shop the next morning, the paper warm and sharp-edged in my hands. At 9:22 a.m., I walked into the lawyer's office again. He studied the pages, brow furrowing deeper with each line. "This seals it," he said. "They can't claim it was all for you. This shows personal use. That strengthens your position considerably." That afternoon, my father called. His voice was sharp, almost frantic. "You think this will hold up? Families don't drag each other through court." I stared at the printouts spread across my friend's table, the numbers like bullet points of betrayal. "I didn't drag anyone," I said quietly. "You did, when you signed my name." There was silence on the line. I could almost hear his breath, heavy and uneven. Then the call cut off. The truth gap had closed. There was no room left for excuses, no shadow where they could hide intent. 3 weeks later, the apartment no longer felt borrowed. My clothes hung in the narrow wardrobe. A small plant sat on the windowsill, leaves angled toward the pale November sun. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee and detergent from the laundromat downstairs. The injunction held. The case was moving forward, slowly but steadily. My savings weren't fully restored yet, but they were no longer bleeding out through someone else's pen. That was enough for now. I set rules for myself. My bank card stays with me, my passwords change every 3 months, my health decisions are mine alone. No signatures without my eyes on the paper. When my mother called one evening, her voice was brittle. "Come home for dinner. We should talk." I looked at the clock on the wall, 6:18 p.m., and let the silence stretch. Finally, I answered, "Not tonight. I need space." The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of a new boundary. Later, I sat at the table with my cup of tea. The chipped mug from my parents' kitchen had been replaced by a plain white one I'd bought myself. The steam curled upward, soft against my face. I thought of the hospital lights, the crumpled discharge slip, the 22 street lights between the ward and home. I thought of the folder, the withdrawals, the signatures that weren't mine. And then I thought of now, of air that was mine to breathe, choices that were mine to make. I sit here, in this small apartment, ribs still healing, but stronger each day. The clock ticks on the wall. The tea cools in my hand. And for the first time in years, the numbers add up to something I can live with.